Hello fellow bass players and welcome to today's video. I want you to raise your hand if you've ever been really frustrated in the practice room. Yeah, pretty sure we've all been there. So why does that happen? Why do we get frustrated in the practice room? At least for me, it's when I can't do something the way I want to and I do it wrong, not once, not twice, but 3 or more times, and I'll just get frustrated and just hit the strings out of frustration and sometimes have to actually put the bass down and go do something else while I cool off. The key thing that I'm looking at here is the source of the frustration, which usually stems from not having done the right prep work beforehand, which leads to inconsistencies and mistakes, which leads to frustrations. In many cases, it simply comes from not quite taking the right practice approaches to set that strong foundation for whatever it is that you're working on. So let's talk about it. Here are 5 ways you might be practicing wrong and what you might try instead. I think this one in particular is probably more important, at least to me, than any of the other things in this list. You could have literally everything else in place. Perfect rhythm, impeccable tone and articulation, and the most compelling musical interpretation that would make every teacher you've ever played for shed a tear and nod approvingly. But man, if it's out of tune, all of those other wonderful things are completely invalidated. In my own experiences and in working with some of my students, I've found that it's honestly much harder to correct bad intonation after the fact because you've essentially worked the out of tune notes into your muscle memory. So what should you do instead? Especially when you're in the learning phases of the process, as well as when you come across something that's just not quite sitting in tune correctly, you've got to slow things down and consider how each interval relates to the others around it. So I take the time to carefully place each note in tune with the one before it and the one after it, making sure that I'm practicing with some kind of drone or reference pitch. I like to slur each note into the next and back again and listen in carefully and adjust accordingly. Here's a short example of what I mean on the first phrase of the Lieutenant Kijé solo by Prokofiev. So conveniently, this is a harmonic note, but I'm gonna check my fretted note against that harmonic or a reference pitch of some kind, be that an open string maybe. Make sure it's sitting nice and in tune. And the next thing I wanna do is just make it feel and sound exactly the way I want it to. I think that's feeling pretty good. So now I'm going to connect it to the next note, which is a shift up to a high D. Now, historically, I've had difficulties with this. Even though it's a harmonic note, we're not going to play it as a harmonic, or at least I don't. I know some people do, but I like to vibrate that note. So I'm going to practice this shift, how I mentioned before, by slurring into it and then slurring back. Here's what I mean. See, I didn't quite make it back. And it's a little inconsistent, so I'm going to play with this a little bit until I've got it feeling more consistent. And that feels way better already. So now I'm going to go ahead and slur up to the next note, and then I'm going to play with the high D with the note following, which is going to be a C natural. Listen for that whole step. Okay. So that's kind of the process that I go through to check each note against the one before it and the one after it and place each note in tune. Also, regarding shifting in particular, I do plan to do another video specifically on strategies for practicing shifts. So be sure to get subscribed to the channel and ring the notification bell so you won't miss out on that. This is one bad habit that is incredibly easy for me to get into. Let's say that I'm in a place where I've considered my intervals and things feel pretty good intonation-wise. So now it's time to start putting everything together and playing through the piece in its entirety, right? Well, maybe, but most likely not, probably not. Now, I will say that as I'm learning something, I'll occasionally test myself, closer to the real tempo or performance context, just to see how things are going. I do think it's important to practice performing as a separate exercise from critical practice. However, after playing a bit, usually I'll realize that a handful of things aren't working and move to address those things before continuing. The place where impatience comes in is overlooking this step and thinking to myself, well, if I just play it like 100 more times, I'll probably get it. Practicing impatiently, however, leaves a lot of room for important details to be overlooked, like dynamics, phrasing, tone color, and consistency of the execution. And that lack of detail, as well as your mistakes, will become ingrained into your muscle memory if you continue to repeat them. There's that classic quote from Albert Einstein: "The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results." If something isn't working or the details aren't addressed, they're not going to get better by just repeating them over and over again. Take the time to break your practice down into its core fundamentals. Try practicing for intonation, rhythm, dynamics, and phrasing, all independently from one another. As humans, despite what we like to think about ourselves, we're pretty notoriously bad at multitasking. So if you're trying to concentrate and improve on all of these aspects at once, you're bound to overlook a couple things in the process. Once you get it right, the most important next step is to repeat and ingrain the correct way of doing things. It's really easy to get excited and move on when we get it right once, but you're going to dramatically increase the likelihood of being consistently correct if you repeat it 5 to 10 times before you move on. I like to make a sort of game out of it. My goal is, for example, to play it 5 times correctly in a row, but if I miss one, I have to start over from 0 again. Remember, you don't want to just play it right. You want to play it right every single time. You've decided. It's time to practice. You've tuned, warmed up, played your scales, as you always should before you just jump into your practicing, and you're ready to go. Kusevitsky is on the stand. The audition wants just the entire first movement, and you've practiced the exposition at length yesterday, but really, you just want to... Stop always starting at the beginning.
Stop it. Get some help.
Seriously. The number of times I've had a student come in and play for their lesson and play like the first page or two really, really well, and then just proceed to
advertiser-friendly content
all over the last page. But seriously, make that conscious decision to not only work forward from the beginning, but actually work backwards from the ending as well. Sometimes it's as simple as just starting on the last page of the piece, but also try practicing from the very last note of the piece and work backwards from there. You can also do the same sort of thing with the last note of a phrase or section. You know how people always talk about how when they know something really well, they know it backwards and forwards? Yeah, I feel like there might actually be some truth to that. This one sort of rolls into both practicing impatiently as well as starting things at the beginning all the time. It can be really tempting to play and practice entire sections at once, maybe because we really want to be able to hear context for what we're playing and practicing. Now, I'm definitely not saying to never practice larger sections or even practice performing the entire thing. Absolutely do this. However, I think it's really important to build up to that. Often for me, it starts with one note. I'll practice to make that note sound exactly the way I want it to, just like we did earlier with KJ, and then move on to the next note. Eventually, those 1 or 2 notes become 1 or 2 measures. Then I'll do the same thing with the next 2 bars, build those next 2 bars up, put them together. So now, instead of playing all 4 bars and trying to improve every aspect of it at once, I've considered every note individually and how it relates to everything around it. Small sections become large sections become entire movements. You get the idea. The idea is to make your frame of practice smaller in order to capture more detail and get more out of your practice time. In another one of my videos, I think it was how to stay motivated during a pandemic, I talked about how concrete goal setting can be a really powerful tool in helping us to realize our ambitions, but also keep ourselves honest, accountable, and motivated. I talked about how small goals like daily or weekly goals ultimately give way to goals for 1 month, 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, and even 10 years. I think this concept is incredibly relevant to how we structure practice time. For example, let's say that I decide there's an audition coming up in 4 months that I intend to take, and my goal is to win. So what are the exact steps that I need to take in order to realize that goal? I used to be the kind of practicer that would look at the calendar and think, oh man, that's in like 4 months. I have plenty of time. And then a month later say, oh man, that's in like 3 months. I have plenty of time. Before I knew it, I'd look at the calendar and realize, oh shit, that thing's in like 2 weeks. And frantically cram 4 months of practicing into 2 weeks. And then I would wonder why I wasn't doing well at auditions. On this point, I am a big fan of the community Rob Knopper's Audition Hacker Academy. If you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend checking it out, since Rob has essentially broken down the audition preparation process into an exacting science, and it works. I'll leave a link to his website in the description below. But one of my biggest takeaways was his approach to organizing your practice time. For example, look at your calendar from now until the event is going to happen in 4 months, and map out how much realistic practice time you have each day. And I say realistic because we can just as easily say, I'm going to practice 10 hours a day for 4 months. When we all know, A, that isn't going to happen, but B, it's not a very good approach either, because many of us have jobs, and you're going to need to plan rest days anyway. But once you have all of your practice time accounted for, you map out a plan for how you're going to spend that time every day to create a roadmap to your success. If you want to know more about how to really do this effectively, along with a myriad of other auditions and practice strategies, definitely check out Audition Hacker. I guarantee you won't regret it. But it all comes back to the power of goal setting and time organization to best set ourselves up for success. Well guys, that's going to do it for this one. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and get subscribed to the channel so you won't miss future videos. And if you're looking for more bass content to watch, perhaps you'd be interested in one of my other videos. I think I'll leave you with 5 reasons your notes don't speak, and staying motivated during a pandemic, since that sort of ties into the goal setting aspect that I mentioned earlier. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Catch you later. Bye.